Hey friends, welcome back. Tonight, we're stepping into the cold, candlelit corridors of the Victorian era, a time of corsets, carriages, and courtship rituals that made Tinder look like sorcery. You ever wonder what it was like to date back then? Spoiler if you thought texting back late was a red flag. Imagine waiting 6 weeks for a reply by letter, only to find out they died of typhoid. Romantic, right? But don't worry, you won't need to lace up a corset or practice your fainting spells. Just get comfy, dim the lights, wrap yourself in something soft, and maybe let that ceiling fan hum like a distant carriage. And hey, before we begin, if this kind of gentle, sleepy storytelling helps you unwind, consider liking the video or subscribing. No pressure, we're not in 1847, there are no social obligations here. Now settle in, because in tonight's tale, we follow a young woman navigating the thorny world of etiquette, expectation, and the occasional stolen glance behind a lace fan. It's not quite The Bachelor, but there will be awkward tea parties, family secrets, and at least one scandal involving trousers. Ready? Then let's drift backward into a world of candlelight and consequence, and let your thoughts slow to the rhythm of rustling petticoats and ticking grandfather clocks. So, you're a man in Victorian England. Congratulations, you have a slight advantage. You are allowed to speak first, own property, and you only faint occasionally. But don't let that fool you into thinking dating will be easy. You are not living in a romantic novel. You are living in a time when ankles were considered provocative, and any form of genuine emotion was likely to result in your being labelled a rake, cad, or man with dangerous opinions. You're around 27, which means you're practically a dusty relic by romantic standards. Your mother is already panicking and hosting dinner parties with the subtlety of a cannon blast. Every time she pours tea, it's followed by a long, dramatic sigh and a reminder that Lady Eleanor's son married a viscount's daughter, and now they have a library. But the real issue is this: you have no idea how to actually meet a woman. No Tinder, no speed dating, no accidentally bumping into someone at a bookstore while holding a copy of Byron. Just a room, some doilies, and a hope that your sideburns are enough to get someone to look twice. Step 1: attend a ball. Now, don't get excited. This is not the ballroom from the movies where a string quartet swells and your future wife slow spins toward you in a swirl of silk and destiny. This is a sweaty, overlit room full of powdered people who smell like mildew and try not to say anything remotely interesting. Your job? Stand. Stand with purpose. Stand with spine. Stand as though you're posing for a statue that no one will ever commission. You may not speak to a lady unless she is properly introduced. And introductions don't just happen. You need a mutual connection. Someone who thinks you're only mildly dreadful and is willing to risk their reputation by linking your name to someone with a uterus. You spend your evenings scanning the room, but every lady you look at immediately averts her gaze, as if your eye contact might cause spontaneous scandal. You try to look charming, approachable, rich. It mostly comes across as confused and mildly unwell. A matron finally introduces you to Miss Abigail Fernsby, daughter of a coal baron and proud owner of precisely 0 facial expressions. She greets you with a curtsy so restrained it could be mistaken for a knee twitch. You bow. It is awkward. You exchange a few lines of rehearsed dialogue. How do you find the weather? I find it seasonal. Riveting. You offer your arm for a dance. She accepts because it is expected. You walk to the floor like strangers approaching a duel. The waltz begins. 3/4 time. You're sweating through your cravat. Your gloves are too tight. Your shoes are pinching. And the only thing you can think about is whether you're supposed to talk or just silently count beats until death. You try a conversation. She responds with one-word answers and a smile so forced it could crack porcelain. Eventually, the music ends. You bow, she curtsies. And with a level of efficiency that borders on military, she's escorted away by her mother and replaced by another girl exactly like her, just with slightly different fringe on her sleeves. You repeat this process 6 more times. You learn absolutely nothing about anyone. You return home with aching feet, a bruised ego, and the vague suspicion that women are actively trained to find you unworthy. And God help you if you're not rich, because everything about Victorian dating is designed to scream, "Ah, wife, ah, state yours. Naut lovi." You can't just marry a girl because she reads poetry and laughs at your jokes. You marry her because her family owns a carriage and her father doesn't gamble excessively. She, in turn, will marry you if your lineage is sufficiently dull, your jawline acceptable, and your income steady enough to guarantee at least 2 drawing rooms and a maid who doesn't faint during full moons. So you're now in the courting phase, which is less courtship and more polite surveillance. You may call upon her. This does not mean you may spend time alone together. It means you sit in a heavily upholstered room while she embroiders something that might be a flower and might be a cautionary tale about repression. Her mother is always there, watching, judging, mentally deducting points every time you slouch or stammer. You may bring a small gift, not too personal, nothing floral, that implies passion, God forbid, no jewelry, that implies commitment. A book of psalms is safe. Bread is also acceptable. Maybe a tasteful brooch with a dead relative's hair woven inside. Romantic. You may engage in parlor games, which sound playful but are mostly designed to keep you at least 3 feet apart and constantly supervised. Even something as innocent as charades is regulated like a nuclear facility. Guessing, the word is love, is enough to get you permanently banned from the household. At the end of every visit you bow. She curtsies. Again, always with the curtsies. And still, after all of that, you have no idea if she likes you. She might not. She might think you're a tolerable investment in her long-term survival. She might just want someone who doesn't smell like boiled mutton. There's no way to know, because expressing actual feelings, that's scandalous. You are expected to pine silently, to express affection through footnotes and careful placement of your top hat. A woman accidentally brushing your sleeve is enough to make your heart do backflips and your aunt to faint into her biscuits. And so, dear sir, this is how dating works. You stand, you bow, you bring cake, you speak in riddles, you never ever say what you actually feel. And if everything goes well, maybe, just maybe, in 6 months, she will agree to marry you. And you'll finally be allowed to hold her hand, briefly, through gloves, while supervised. So you've made it through the first phase of Victorian dating without combusting into a pile of crushed dignity and cravat sweat. Bravo. You've survived the ballroom, the forced small talk, and the eerie smile of Miss Abigail Fernsby, the human equivalent of an unsweetened biscuit. You are now officially courting, which, in Victorian terms, means you are trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare disguised as romance. Welcome to the call. Not a phone call. Don't be ridiculous. It's 1847. The only thing you can call is a carriage or the Grim Reaper. No. Calling means you physically arrive at a lady's house and present your calling card. A small piece of cardboard that says, "Hello, I would like to attempt human connection, but only during hours dictated by an 87-year-old woman who sleeps in a lace cocoon. Calling hours are usually from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. because apparently no one in this country has anything to do except drink tepid tea and practice intense emotional repression. You ride over in your best coat, tailored, but not too tailored. Don't want to look French, with your shoes shined, your hat brushed, and your soul slowly leaking out through your collar. The butler greets you with a level of disdain usually reserved for dogs who relieve themselves in parlours. You hand over your calling card. He looks at it as if it might explode. If you're lucky, and by lucky, I mean considered wealthy enough, pale enough, and not actively coughing, you are admitted to the drawing room. This is where things get weird. The drawing room is a trap. Do not be fooled by the pastel wallpaper, the piano no one plays, and the bowl of sad, decorative lemons. This room is where reputations are made, hearts are broken, and lives are silently judged into oblivion. She enters. Your attended. Your prospect. Your maybe. If we survive this social minefield, we can hold hands in 7 months, partner. She is accompanied, always, by a chaperone, her mother, her aunt, a sister who's been engaged for 7 years. Anyone, whose entire job is to sit very still, sip tea, and silently communicate, "I am here to prevent sin." Conversation begins, slowly, painfully. So, the weather continues to occur. Yes! It is persistently grey, indeed, silence. You are sitting 2 feet apart, speaking at a volume barely above a whisper, surrounded by the constant ticking of a grandfather clock that judges you harder than the chaperone. You sip your tea. You pretend not to notice that it tastes like boiled disappointment. You try another topic, maybe literature. I recently read a rather stirring translation of Virgil. Oh, yes. It included metaphors. The girl nods. You nod. The chaperone does not blink. You're afraid to shift in your seat in case the movement is misinterpreted as intention. You accidentally glance at the girl's wrist scandal. The chaperone shifts. You apologize to the room. You apologize to the Queen. You apologize to God. At some point, you attempt a gesture, not affection, heaven forbid, but something close to warmth. You comment on her embroidery. You say the tulip looks like a courageous radish. She almost smiles. Her mother coughs. You return to silence. This continues for weeks. You call on her once, maybe twice a week. You sit, you talk. You pretend to be calm while your entire future is being decided based on how well you balance a teacup. Eventually, if things go well, and by well, I mean no one fainted, cried, or accused you of liking poetry too enthusiastically, you may be invited to join her on a walk. This is not a date. This is not romantic. This is a sanctioned public stroll in daylight hours with a third party trailing 6 feet behind you like a judgmental ghost. You walk in a park on gravel through hedges. You speak lightly. You point at ducks. You mention how thrilling it is to see trees again. If you're feeling bold, you allow your sleeves to accidentally brush. Your reward, a nod, a brief smile. Maybe a follow-up invitation to come back next Tuesday for more supervised sitting. Do not mistake this for momentum. Even if you walk her for 3 months straight, you still must receive permission from her family, and often your own, before proceeding to the next stage of formal courtship, which is just like informal courtship, except now both families are involved, and everyone is praying no one has a scandalous uncle. You begin writing letters. These letters are not filled with affection or flirtation. No. They are composed of long paragraphs about the weather, your horse's health, and how deeply you respect her opinions on stationery. You sign them with phrases like, in earnest regard, and your most obedient servant. You receive replies written in the same tone, carefully worded so no one could possibly accuse either of you of being enthusiastic. Still, you're filled with hope, she replied. That's something. Her reply included an additional sentence about her piano lessons. You feel dizzy with intimacy. But deep down, you know the truth. This is all a test. Everything you do, every gesture, word, blink, is being scrutinized. Not just by her, but by her parents, her siblings, her dog, the butler, the neighbors, the vicar, and the entire system of Victorian values that believes emotion is only appropriate if you're dying in a poem. And yet you persist. Because you are a man in Victorian England, and this is the only way. This is how love begins slowly, silently, and beneath several hundred layers of obligation, lace, and lukewarm tea. And if you're very lucky one day, her father will call you, respectable, and you will be allowed to propose. Assuming, of course, she doesn't mysteriously vanish to visit her aunt in Yorkshire, which is code for, you didn't make the cut. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because first, you still have to survive the proposal process, where things somehow get even more complicated. So, you've done the dances, you've done the walks, you've suffered through polite conversation so dry it could ignite. You've written letters about rainfall and moral character. And now, after months of social ballet and emotional constipation, it's finally time to propose. Except you can't just propose. That would be too easy. Too modern, too human. No, sir, this is Victorian England, where nothing happens without paperwork, dread, and an elderly relative standing in a corner muttering about family honour. Before you even think about slipping a ring on anyone's gloved finger, you must first ask for permission. Not from the woman herself, that would be far too progressive, but from her father, a man whose hobbies include hunting, judging your waistcoat and reminding everyone that he once shook hands with a duke in 1823. You dress for the occasion, carefully. Dark coat, white shirt, cravat tied with trembling fingers. Your boots are polished within an inch of their life. Your sideburns are symmetrical. You have practiced saying, sir, in at least 4 different tones: respectful, deferential, apologetic, and faintly terrified. You arrive at the estate. You are shown into a study filled with heavy furniture and taxidermy. Her father is seated in a leather chair. holding a brandy he doesn't appear to need but drinks anyway, just in case this conversation gets too cheerful. He gestures for you to sit. You sit, on the edge, like a man prepared to leap out the window if things go wrong. There is a silence so long you begin to question whether you're still alive. Then he speaks. Just that. One word. So it hangs in the air like a guillotine on a windy day. You swallow. You clear your throat. You say your line. The one you practiced in the mirror 18 times while a servant watched, confused. Sir, I have come to respectfully request your daughter's hand in marriage. He doesn't blink. He doesn't nod. He swirls his brandy like it holds your fate. Do you have land? He asks. A terrifying question, because you don't technically own land. Your uncle does. But you've walked on land. You've seen land. Surely that counts for something. I have access to land, you say. He arches one eyebrow. You die a little inside. What is your income? Another dangerous question. Because income in Victorian England is not about how much money you make. It's about how much money your family has been making since Henry V stopped chopping people's heads off. It's about estates, investments, and whether your second cousin married someone titled. You throw out a number. Modest, but not pathetic. Enough to suggest security. Not enough to suggest ambition, which can be vulgar. He grunts. Do you play cricket? This is a trap. Yes, sir. Are you good at it? No, sir. He nods, satisfied. He hates good cricketers. Arrogant lot. Finally, after 20 minutes of being interviewed like a man trying to adopt an heiress, he sets down his brandy. You may propose, he says. You do not cheer. You do not smile. You nod gravely, as though you've just been granted the right to shovel coal during a rainstorm. And now the real nerves begin. You are about to propose marriage to a woman you've spoken to approximately 12 times in public. Always while seated, always while being observed, and never while exchanging anything close to a genuine emotion. Still you're hopeful. You dress again, something slightly more romantic. A fresh cravat, a red carnation, a pocket square that says, I am emotionally available, but only between the hours of 3 and 5. You bring a small box, velvet of course. Inside is the ring, modest, tasteful. Not too large lest it be seen as gaudy. Not too small lest it imply insolvency or cowardice. She is waiting in the drawing room, seated like a Victorian statue, perfect posture, hands folded, expression blank with a faint trace of duty. You sit across from her. The chaperone, as always, is present, though today she is pretending to read. She is, of course, listening to every syllable as if it were courtroom testimony. You begin to speak. Your voice is calm, but your lungs are actively trying to exit through your back. Your palms are sweating through your gloves. You offer words, not of passion, but of affection, respect, and familial alignment. You avoid anything too poetic. You compliment her character. You suggest a future built on mutual esteem and shared values, that then you present the ring. She accepts, not with tears, not with gasps, with a nod. A small, reserved nod. You slip the ring on her finger, above the glove, of course. Skin contact at this point would be basically indecent. The chaperone makes a noise that might be approval or a sneeze. Congratulations, you're engaged. Now the real fun begins. Your engagement is not private. It is announced, in the papers, at church, via dozens of handwritten notes sent by people with nothing better to do. You are now under even more scrutiny. There are no romantic getaways, no candlelit dinners. Your dates consist of visiting her aunt's house and playing parlour games that involve quoting psalms and avoiding eye contact. You may write to her. More letters. Slightly more personal now, but still filtered through a sieve of decorum. You may say you are fond. You may reference future happiness. Anything more intense must be buried in metaphor. She writes back with equal restraint. A few extra sentences. Perhaps an exclamation point, a scandalous thrill that sends you pacing the room for hours. You begin making arrangements. Weddings in Victorian England are not about love. They are about contracts, negotiations, dowries, flowers chosen for their lack of suggestive symbolism. You'll spend weeks planning a day that involves absolutely no dancing, laughter, or outward displays of joy. But that's the next chapter. For now, you are engaged, bound by law, expectation, and the crushing weight of 19th century tradition. You've done it. You've survived courtship. You've proposed like a gentleman, and you still haven't touched her hand without gloves. Congratulations. You are now engaged, which, in Victorian England, means you are under surveillance from every possible angle. Family, clergy, distant cousins who live in Wells and only emerge to judge, and even the local baker, who has very strong opinions about whether your fiancé curtsies with sufficient grace. You are no longer just a man. You are an engaged man, which is a temporary species known for high anxiety, unconvincing smiles, and waistcoats that get tighter with each new seating chart adjustment. Let's begin with the wedding planning. Now, you might think this involves the bride, but no, weddings in Victorian England are family events, which means every decision must pass through a labyrinth of aunts, mothers, and one uncle who insists that no true ceremony is complete without a goose procession. First order of business, the church. It must be Anglican, obviously. Anything else is suspicious. Catholic, you might as well declare yourself a French spy. Methodist, they'll burn your wedding cake in protest. And God forbid you suggest eloping. That's not romance. That's scandal with a carriage. Once the church is booked, it's on to the guest list. The average Victorian wedding includes your immediate family, her immediate family, everyone you've ever nodded to in public, 5 men who are only invited because they own stables, 17 women who have never met either of you but are somehow family friends, at least one child who plays the violin badly, toodle guests, somewhere between 80 and eternal damnation. Next, the attire. You will wear a morning suit, which is just formal wear designed to remind you that nothing you wear will ever be comfortable again. Tailcoat, waistcoat, cravat that feels like a polite noose, shoes that click like you're announcing your presence to God. The bride will wear white, not because it symbolizes purity that came later, but because Queen Victoria wore it once and now it's the law. Her dress will be long, heavy, and made entirely of fabric not found in nature. It will require 14 buttons, 2 maids, and enough lace to smother a horse. The wedding itself will take place precisely at noon. Not earlier, because people are still digesting breakfast. Not later, because any ceremony after lunch is morally unstable. You will stand at the front of the church, sweating gently under the weight of your coat, your choices, and the realization that your mother is mouthing, "Don't mess this up," from the pews. She enters. Your bride. Miss Abigail Fernsby, now looking more like the ghost of a fashionable iceberg than the woman who once complimented your seasonal poetry collection. The congregation stands. She walks up the aisle with the pace and expression of someone approaching an arranged duel. The priest begins. Now, Victorian wedding vows are not romantic. They are not personalized. There is no "I wrote this poem on a foggy cliff and now I'm weeping." There is just one script, the same for everyone. As if marriage were a government-issued ration of affection. You say your lines. She says hers. Obey is included. Naturally, you exchange rings. You may now brace yourself, kiss the bride. Except you don't. Kissing in church is considered improper. You may nod respectfully at your new wife. Perhaps touch her hand for a brief second. The kiss comes later in private, behind a door, possibly under a blanket, with the windows covered and everyone pretending it didn't happen. The ceremony ends. You are now husband and wife. You walk down the aisle together, like 2 people preparing to chair a meeting about emotional repression. And then, oh joy, the reception. This is not a party. This is a gathering of people trying very hard not to dance. There is food. Not good food. Just food that exists. Ham, cold beef, aspic. Something gelatinous pretending to be festive. You do not drink much. Drunkenness is frowned upon unless you're in the Navy or a Duke. You do not toast freely. Each speech must be carefully vetted to avoid humor, charm, or anything that could be interpreted as personality. Someone plays the piano. A child cries. Your great-aunt mentions that her wedding had 30 more guests and a harpist who survived the Crimea. At one point, you and your new wife share a dance. Brief. Chaste. Coordinated by a chaperone who still hasn't stopped monitoring you, even though you're now legally allowed to share property and emotional distance. You look at her, she looks at you, and for the first time, you think we did it. You survived the labyrinth, the letters, the lace, the endless parade of moral evaluations disguised as small talk. You've made it to the finish line of Victorian dating. which is actually just the starting line of Victorian marriage, a whole new arena of matching curtains, childbearing pressure, and remembering not to breathe too loud during breakfast. You say something quietly, something not rehearsed, something real. She smiles. Not a big smile, not a scandalous smile, but a smile all the same. And that's it. That's the moment. That's the reward. Everything before this, the courtship, the permission, the speeches, the crushing expectations, all of it was just a grand, upholstered prelude to that one quiet second of shared humanity. But don't get too comfortable, because now comes the honeymoon, and believe me, that's not going to be a beach in Greece. It's going to be a country inn, a bowl of broth, and an awkward first night spent trying to pretend you both understand how any of this works. But we'll get there. For now, take your new wife by the gloved hand. Say goodbye to your guests. Thank the aunt with the mole who insisted on singing during the toast. And prepare yourself, because up next is the part no one warned you about. You're married now. The guests have left. The flowers have wilted. Someone took home 3 extra slices of aspic jelly, and you're fairly sure your uncle tried to duel the vicar over who invented marmalade. But none of that matters, because now it's time for the honeymoon. Ah yes, the Victorian honeymoon, a phrase that implies romance, travel, and intimacy. But in reality, it's a socially enforced panic spiral masquerading as a holiday. First, you must select a destination that is respectable. This means not too exotic, not too close, and absolutely not anywhere people might be enjoying themselves too much. France is too French. Italy is too artistic. Scotland is too damp. Brighton is just full of other nervous newlyweds pretending not to exist. You settle on Bath, because nothing says passionate getaway like tepid mineral water and public expectations. Your wife agrees, or rather, she nods and says, "That will be quite agreeable," which, in Victorian marriage terms, is basically a declaration of wild lust. You hire a private carriage, because trains are fast, and nothing in Victorian courtship is allowed to be fast. Your luggage includes 17 trunks, 14 hats, and 1 wicker basket full of marital jade. You sit across from your wife, in silence. The ride is bumpy, long, full of clouds and sheep and the sound of your own heartbeat trying to escape your ribcage. You attempt to make conversation, something light, safe. Do you enjoy thermal activity? She blinks. I find hot water rather soothing. You nod, as if she's just quoted Shakespeare. The rest of the ride is spent contemplating the upholstery. Upon arrival at the inn, the royal swans and teacup, you're greeted by a woman who smells like boiled cabbage and gives you a look that says, "I know exactly what you're here for, and I disapprove." You are shown to your bridal suite. The room is floral, aggressively floral. There are roses on the walls, roses on the bedspread, roses in the curtains, and a single rose in a vase that has clearly died of embarrassment. The bed is enormous, but the distance between you and your wife feels roughly equivalent to the English Channel. She stands near the window. You stand near the fireplace. You both pretend to admire opposite ends of the room, because here it is, the moment. The one everyone's been hinting at with blushing winks and unsolicited pamphlets about marital duties. The moment you're supposed to cross the final, terrifying threshold between awkward acquaintanceship and physical affection. Except, and here's the fun part, no one has explained anything. Your parents never told you. Her parents never told her. The only advice you've received came from your friend Rupert, who once said, "Just don't cry afterward, old chap." There's a silence. She coughs politely. You clear your throat as if preparing to deliver a sermon. Eventually, she says, "I think I shall change into something more comfortable." These are the most intimidating words ever spoken by a human being. She disappears behind a folding screen. You panic. You remove your coat, your waistcoat, your cravat, all with the speed of a man disarming a bomb. You wonder if there's a correct posture for standing next to your own bed in partial undress, while your new wife is somewhere nearby removing 18 pounds of lace. She reemerges. You glance. Then you look away, because looking too long might cause the innkeeper to burst in and revoke your marriage license. She sits on the edge of the bed. You sit on a nearby chair, as if awaiting an appointment. More silence. Finally, you gather the courage of every ancestor who's ever passed down a bad haircut and walk toward the bed. You say, Well then, which is possibly the least romantic sentence in the English language. She nods. You nod. The bed creaks ominously. What follows is not a passionate embrace. It is not even a clumsy attempt at seduction. It is, instead, a series of logistical negotiations, mild apologies, and the quiet rustling of clothing being removed like sacred relics. You are both nervous. You are both deeply, existentially confused. And no one knows where any body part is supposed to go. Eventually, you accomplish something vaguely resembling the act. You lie there afterward, staring at the ceiling, unsure whether you should speak, snore, or repent. Your wife pulls the blanket up to her chin and says, "That was not unpleasant." You say, "Indeed." You both fall asleep like two diplomats who've just negotiated a fragile peace treaty. The next morning you rise early and eat breakfast in silence. You sip tea. She nibbles toast. Every time you make eye contact, one of you drops a fork. You go for a walk, because that's what Victorian couples do on honeymoons. You walk stiffly through manicured gardens, nodding at other honeymooners who look equally traumatized. Occasionally, you stop to admire a statue or speculate on the local flora, not because you care, but because silence must be filled with something. You do this for 6 days. Every day you walk. Every evening, you return to the floral battlefield of your suit, where intimacy continues to feel like an amateur fencing match with emotional swords. And slowly, very slowly, something changes. You begin to talk a little more. She laughs, once, quietly, at something you say about the soup. You notice she has a habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she's thinking. She notices that you fold your gloves obsessively when you're nervous. One night, as you stand by the window, she joins you. You don't say anything. She just rests her hand near yours. Not touching, just near. And for the first time, the silence feels less sharp, less terrifying. Maybe this thing, this marriage, isn't about immediate passion or grand declarations. Maybe it's about learning how to be with someone awkwardly, gently, until it doesn't feel awkward anymore. You don't love her, not yet. But you might, and that, in this strange, silent, tea-scented world, is something close to a miracle. You return from the honeymoon changed. Not dramatically. You're not suddenly flinging doors open with confidence or embracing your wife in public. No, that would be scandalous. But the silence between you has softened. Where once it stood sharp and towering, now it merely hums, like the ticking of a shared clock. The carriage ride home is quieter, but not awkward. She reads a slim volume of poetry. You pretend to read the newspaper, but find yourself watching the way she leans into the window light. Back at your newly shared home, a modest London townhouse with uneven floorboards and an aggressively ticking grandfather clock. The reality of marriage arrives with its lace, gloved hands around your shoulders. This is no longer a courtship. This is life. Your wife unpacks her things into the bedroom you now share. She does it with such calm certainty that you feel like a guest in your own house. Her perfume fills the air, not overpowering, but there always, like a whisper just out of earshot. Your valet informs you that the dressing room will now be used jointly. A deeply intimate arrangement, considering you've only just learned how she styles her hair. Now you must hang your shirts beside her corsets, your shaving brush next to her rose-scented creams. You feel like a soldier venturing across a border he didn't know existed. The first few mornings are the strangest. You wake up next to someone. Not a dream. Not an intruder. Your wife. Her hair is braided back. She breathes softly. And yet, there is always that moment, that panic. When you forget this is allowed, breakfast is served downstairs. You sit across from each other in robes of politeness. You ask if she slept well. She asks if you'd like another egg. You both pretend you haven't accidentally bumped knees under the table. Then comes the ritual of the social call. Now that you are married, you must visit everyone who has ever shaken your hand, spilled wine on your shoes, or commented on your cravat. You and your wife become a unit. A walking pair of gloves and opinions, paraded through parlours and drawing rooms like show ponies. You visit the Wilkinsons first. They are ancient. Their drawing room smells like regret and mint. The newlyweds, cries Mrs. Wilkinson, who has been alive since the Roman Empire. Still glowing, are we? You both smile the tight smiles of people who have shared a bed, but not yet a conversation about money. Next is the Arkwrights, who have 14 children and a pet goose that wanders indoors freely. The children stare at you as if expecting you to produce an hair on the spot. The goose honks once, directly at your wife's hemline. Then come the Brandons, who are practically royalty. Lady Brandon raises one eyebrow and says, "Well, it's certainly a match," in the same tone one might use for an undercooked pudding. The calls blur together. Same chairs, same tea, same questions. "How was the honeymoon?" You answer, "Lovely," and glance at your wife. She nods. You both know this is code for "we did not combust." Back at home, the rhythm of married life begins to take shape. There are habits. New ones, shared ones. She likes the windows open in the morning. You prefer them closed. For 3 days, the windows open and close depending on who reaches them first. Then, on the 4th morning, you both approach at once and settle on halfway. A small compromise. A victory. You discover she likes to hum while sewing. She discovers you talk to yourself while reading. These are the harmless oddities you had never thought to prepare for. Now they are part of the fabric of your life. Sewn in, like invisible stitches, evenings are delicate. You read in your armchair, she embroiders. Occasionally you speak. Once, she looks up from her needlework and asks, "Do you think we'll like each other more with time?" It's a startling question. You don't know how to answer it, so you say, "I think we'll understand each other." She smiles at that. It's small, but it feels earned. Married dinners are served in the dining room. 2 seats, 1 long table. Enough distance between you to host a parliamentary debate. You speak of weather books, the state of the post office. Once, she asks if you ever wanted to be anything other than what you are. You say, "I sometimes imagined being a poet." She tilts her head. "Why didn't you?" You blink. "Because I was told not to," she nods, quietly, as if she understands far more than you expected. There are still awkward moments. You walk into the dressing room once while she is standing in her chemise, and she gasps like you've threatened national security. You apologize. She apologizes. Then you both exit the room in opposite directions and spend the next half hour pretending to read. But then there are other moments. Small, accidental moments that stick. One night, she falls asleep in the armchair by the fire. You carry her to bed, clumsily, like a man trying not to disturb a sleeping cat. She mumbles something, perhaps your name, you don't ask. But you lie awake a little longer that night. Another time, you come home with a headache. She places a cool cloth on your forehead and hums. A soft, unfamiliar melody. You don't ask what it is, but you find yourself humming it 3 days later. Slowly, the house becomes yours. Not just a place you both occupy, but a shared world. There are muddy footprints on the floor after your morning walk. A scarf she left on your chair. A book she borrowed from your shelf and forgot to return. You are no longer 2 people navigating each other's presence. You are 2 people learning how to build something together. It's not passion.
Not yet.
But it is a kind of closeness. The kind you notice most when it's absent, like the warmth of a fire that's quietly burned all day. It begins with a chair. An innocent, walnut armchair that you've always positioned beside the fireplace. Your reading spot. It's where you've sat every evening since moving in, where your newspaper gets folded and your slippers patiently wait. But one Thursday, you come home to find it moved, not slightly, not a few inches off center, but completely across the room, now beside the window. At first, you blink at it. Surely this is a mistake, a housemaid tidying up, a misunderstanding. But then your wife enters, humming softly, and when she sees your face, she stops. "Oh," she says. You've noticed the change. You look at the chair, then at her, then back at the chair. She continues, calm but deliberate. "I thought it made more sense by the window. The light's better there. You're always squinting in the evenings. You are squinting now. But not because of poor light. You don't want to raise your voice. You don't want to be that kind of husband. The stormy kind who slams his fist on the sideboard and demands control. But you also don't want your things to be rearranged without discussion. This was your space long before it was hers. I liked it by the fire, you say. You try to keep your tone measured. She clasps her hands in front of her, and for a second, her eyes flicker with something unreadable. "I thought this was our home," she says, and the emphasis on "or" lands like a stone between you. That's the moment something shifts. The chair was never just a chair, it was comfort, it was control, it was yours. And now, standing in a room that looks almost like the one you remember, but not quite, you realize marriage is less like an addition and more like a blending, a rearrangement of furniture, of expectations of self. You say, I don't mind compromise, but I should be consulted. Her jaw tightens. You weren't here. I made a decision that I thought would help you. I didn't ask for help. I didn't think you had to. There's a silence after that. Not long, but thick. You imagine reaching for her hand. You imagine laughing, saying something absurd to deflate the tension. But instead, you cross the room and lift the chair. You mean to return it to its rightful place. Your place. But as you begin to carry it, one of the legs knocks into the nearby side table. A porcelain teacup, a wedding gift from her great-aunt, falls. It shatters. The silence becomes something else entirely. Her face pales. That was irreplaceable. You didn't mean to. You weren't even angry enough to be careless. But now, standing among ceramic shards, you realize it doesn't matter. Damage is damage. I'll have it repaired. You offer, too quickly. She shakes her head. Some things don't go back the way they were. It's unclear if she's still talking about the cup. You don't sleep well that night. She says nothing more after dinner, retiring early. You sit in the study long after the fire has gone cold, feeling absurdly betrayed by a piece of furniture. In the morning, the chair is still by the window. You consider moving it back out of spite, but you don't. Instead, you leave the room altogether. 2 days pass. Polite distance grows between you. Breakfast is brief. Eye contact becomes rare. It's a quiet war of retreating gestures. She no longer warms the teapot for your second cup. You stop asking how her sewing is going. You want to fix it, but you don't know how. Because it isn't really about a chair. It's about the shape of your marriage. Who gets to decide what it looks like? Who bends first? On the third evening, you find her in the drawing room. She's not sewing, she's just sitting. Her hands are folded, and she's looking out the window at the dimming street lamps. You clear your throat. She doesn't turn. You say, I'm sorry about the teacup. Still nothing. You step closer. I think we both came into this with our own rules. Quiet ones, unspoken ones. And maybe we didn't realize how many they were until they started clashing. That makes her look up. I didn't mean to hurt you, you add. She stands. It wasn't just the cup, I know. There's a pause. And then she speaks, softly but firmly. I've spent my whole life being trained to fit into someone else's house, someone else's customs. I thought here, maybe I could rearrange one small thing. I didn't think it would cost me this much. You want to say she's right, that you understand, that you'll never overreact again. But you also want your chair. So instead, you walk over to it and, slowly, move it to a spot between the fireplace and the window. Not quite hers, not quite yours. The light isn't perfect, the warmth isn't direct, but it's shared. She watches you do it. Then she comes to stand beside you. Will it do? She asks. You nod. It's a start. The next morning, there's a new teacup on the table. Not as fine as the old one, but charming in its own right. It's placed beside your folded newspaper. When she walks in, you stand. And for the first time since your wedding, you don't feel like two people cohabiting a space. You feel like partners. The invitation came in the form of a letter. Tidy, economical handwriting on stiff ivory paper. My mother's tone was pleasant, though I could hear her true meaning tucked between the lines. We are, of course, most curious to meet your husband properly. Do bring him Saturday next for luncheon. Your father will be home from the club by 2. Your sisters are simply beside themselves. I read it aloud at the breakfast table, paused mid-air. He was buttering his, slow and methodical. He looked up only once, then nodded as if this were inevitable. As if all women's families eventually come calling. It'll be fine, I said. I meant it to sound confident. Of course, he replied. Family is important. But we both knew better. My mother had opinions. My father had silence, which was somehow worse. And my sisters, well, they'd known me as a girl. As the emotional, fanciful one. Not as a wife. Certainly not as someone capable of marrying him. On the morning of the visit, I wore the sage green dress with the pearl buttons, the one he once said made me look entirely too serious. I thought that might help. He wore the grey waistcoat I liked, and as the carriage approached my childhood home, I reached for his hand. He gave it, but without his usual warmth. He was nervous. That made two of us. The butler, Jenkins, still alive and stiff as ever, opened the door with a face that implied he had only just forgiven me for leaving. The house smelled like lemon polish and old lace. "Welcome, madam." "Sir." Inside, nothing had changed. The same carpets, same oil portraits glaring from the walls. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked with passive judgment. My mother descended the staircase like a queen returning to court. Her gown was soft lavender, her hair piled high. She did not smile at first, merely scanned him like one might a complicated dinner guest. Which fork will he use? Will he understand the soup course comes first? "Welcome," she said, offering her cheek to me, then her gloved hand to him. "You must be Mr. Everly." He bowed slightly, just enough. "An honor, Mayim." She liked that. I saw it in the way her brows lifted by the smallest fraction. In the drawing room, my sisters were waiting, Clara, wide-eyed and breathless, and Margaret, pretending not to care. Clara hugged me immediately, exclaiming how grown-up I looked, which was a backhanded compliment if ever there was one. Margaret remained seated, sipping tea as though it contained secrets. He greeted them both with politeness and perfect posture. His voice calm, pleasant, but I could feel how tightly wound he was beneath it, like a violin string tuned just 1 degree too sharp. Father arrived late, of course, entered with the casual authority of a man who'd spent years deciding when conversations began and ended. He took one look at my husband and said only, "So, you're the one?" I held my breath. "Yes, sir," he answered. Guilty as charged. A flicker of amusement touched Father's mouth, rare as lightning. At luncheon, things grew trickier. My mother asked about his estate, his income, his connections. Not outright, but carefully, worded like gossip, as though she were curious rather than calculating. He answered with practiced charm, but I saw the flicker in his eyes each time she pressed. He hated being measured, being reduced to sums and land and lineage. Then, Clara brought up the wedding. "Oh, I just must know," she said, beaming at us both. "When did you first know?" I looked at him. He looked at his fork. I answered for us. When he asked me what book I was reading, and he actually listened. The Clara sighed dreamily. Margaret rolled her eyes. My mother's smile was thin. Romance is sweet, but compatibility is what lasts. "I do hope you've discovered the difference." That stung. He set down his fork. "I agree entirely," he said. "Romance is the easy part. It's the Monday mornings and laundry lists that determine longevity." A mother blinked. I smiled. Not because he had won, but because he had spoken. After lunch, Father asked him to walk the gardens. I nearly leapt from my chair, but Mother's hand on my wrist kept me seated. "Let them talk," she said. "If he's to be part of this family, your father must see him properly." I didn't like the sound of that, so I sipped tea with my sisters and endured more questions. What were our plans for children? Was I finding household management overwhelming? Was it strange sharing a bed? They asked as though they hadn't once played dolls with me, as if marriage made me a different species. When the men returned, I watched Father's face closely. No scowls, no flushed cheeks. He poured a second glass of brandy and said, "He's sharper than I thought." That was high praise, by Father's standards. When it came time to leave, my mother walked us to the carriage. She took both my hands, kissed my cheek, then turned to him. "You're steadier than she is," she said softly. "She'll need that." He didn't reply, just nodded. As the carriage pulled away, I exhaled for the first time in hours. "Well," I said, "that could have been worse." He smiled. "But it wasn't." "No." He looked at me then, properly. "You come from sharp people." I laughed. "And you thought I was just lace and novels?" "I never underestimated you," he said. "But I see now where your fire comes from." And we sat in silence after that, the city blurring past the windows. His hand found mine again, and this time, the warmth had returned. It began with a dance. Not a grand ball or anything rehearsed, just the two of us, alone in the drawing room. with the fire crackling low and the storm outside drawing long streaks of rain across the windows. He'd returned late that evening, soaked at the edges, hair mussed, boots dripping in the foyer. He looked like he'd fought the weather just to keep a promise. "I thought you weren't coming home tonight," I said, taking his coat from him. It smelled of rain and horses and something warmer, him. "I wasn't meant to," he replied, his voice hoarse from the cold. "But I wanted to. That should have made me happy. Instead, it made me wary. We'd grown quiet lately. Not distant exactly, but careful, like walking barefoot through a room full of broken teacups, speaking only in nods and shared glances. Marriage wasn't hard, but knowing how to be near someone, truly near, that took more than promises. "I saved you dinner," I said, motioning toward the sideboard. He shook his head. "Not hungry." I nodded, not offended, just unsure where to stand next. He moved to the gramophone. I thought he was fiddling with it to avoid looking at me, but then music filled the room, a slow waltz I hadn't heard since before the wedding. I turned, surprised. "You remember this?" I asked. "I remember everything," he said, already crossing the carpet toward me. He held out his hand. I didn't hesitate. We danced without speaking, our bodies instinctively finding the rhythm. The firelight cast amber shadows on the wallpaper, and the storm outside faded into the background. All I could hear was the music, his breath, my own heartbeat. His hand was at my waist. Mine rested against his chest. I could feel his heart, faster than usual. He'd always had a calm, steady pulse. Tonight it raced. "Are you all right?" I whispered. He nodded. "I'm just tired." "You've been tired a lot lately." He looked away. "The estate is demanding. There's always something broken, or someone who needs a decision." "I could help," I offered. He smiled faintly. "You already do." But something about his voice struck me. Not just tired, strained. Thin around the edges, like a shirt worn one too many seasons. When the song ended, we didn't move. Just stood there, arms still around each other, as though the music might start again if we waited long enough. "I miss this," I said. "This? Me?" Before we became the married couple, his brow furrowed. "You don't like being married." "I love you," I said carefully. "But marriage is quiet. I think I expected more fireworks." He chuckled. "You always did like a bit of thunder." "I like to feel things," I said. "And lately we've been so quiet." His hand tightened at my back. "Sometimes quiet is all I have left." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Just kissed my forehead and stepped away. The next morning, he fainted in the garden. I'd gone out to check on the roses. They were struggling with the damp, and found him slumped near the arbor, one hand braced on the stone bench, his face pale as linen. I ran to him, hard hammering. He tried to wave me off. "Dizzy? No!" I said firmly, already calling for a servant. "This is more." He tried to stand but winced, clutching his side. My mind raced. When had this started? How long had he been hiding it? We got him inside. The doctor came swiftly, his face grim even before he asked any questions. He examined him quietly, then pulled me aside. "He's been masking this for weeks." "Maybe longer," he said. "What is it?" I whispered. "Inflammation of the lungs. Possibly more." "Has he been coughing?" "Fevers," I nodded. But he said it was just the cold. "It isn't." "And if it worsens?" I didn't let him finish. Just nodded and gripped the doorframe until my knuckles turned white. That night, I sat beside the bed as he slept, or tried to. His breaths were shallow, laboured. He didn't complain, didn't moan, just lay there, as still as a painting. When he opened his eyes and saw me, he smiled weakly. "Still here? Where else would I be?" "I thought maybe you'd grown tired of quiet." I swallowed hard. If I said I wanted fireworks, I didn't mean this. He reached for my hand. "There's something I haven't told you." "No," I said. "Later. When you're stronger." "There might not be a later." "Don't say that." "I need to say this," he insisted. "I knew I was sick before we married. I knew something wasn't right. But I didn't want to scare you away." A tear slipped down my cheeks before I realized they'd begun. "I wouldn't have left," I whispered. "I know. That's why I didn't tell you." He closed his eyes again, breathing unevenly. I sat there all night, holding his hand, watching the fire dim, listening to the storm. In the stillness, I realized something painful, and true love is not just fireworks. It's the quiet, too. The waiting, the knowing and not knowing, the hand you still hold, even when it trembles. By morning, his fever broke. He was still weak, still pale, but breathing easier. The doctor returned, relieved. "He's not out of the woods," he said, "but the worst may have passed." I nodded, numb with gratitude. Later that day, as he dozed, I opened the windows and let in the summer breeze. The roses were blooming, defiantly alive despite the rain. And I thought, so are we. The knock came late, an abrupt, impatient rap that shattered the fragile silence of the house like a sudden storm. I had been seated by the window, carefully stitching a delicate pattern on a linen handkerchief, my thoughts tangled between relief and worry over his fragile health. Outside, the lantern flickered faintly on the windowsill, casting quivering shadows that danced like restless spirits across the room's faded wallpaper. He was resting in his study, recovering from the fever that had nearly claimed him, his breathing steadier but still weak. The house felt quieter than usual, as though it, too, held its breath, waiting for what was to come. I rose slowly, startled by the sharp knock. Who could be calling at this hour? The butler, Jenkins, opened the door with a cautious expression, his eyes scanning the dimly lit street. "A gentleman, ma'am. He says it's urgent and asks to see Mr. Everly immediately," Jenkins reported, his tone low but serious. My pulse quickened. "Show him in." A man stepped into the hallway, tall and broad-shouldered, draped in a sodden overcoat that bore the scent of rain and earth. He removed his hat, revealing a weather-beaten face with sharp, clear eyes that seemed to pierce right through the dim light. "I am Thomas Graves," he said simply, "an old friend of Mr. Everly's family. I bring urgent news." Before I could ask any more, the door to the study creaked open, and my husband appeared, his pale face marked with exhaustion, but his eyes instantly alert at the sight of the visitor. "What news do you bring, Thomas?" he asked, voice low and edged with tension. Thomas glanced my way briefly before answering. "It concerns your estate and matters of great importance. They cannot wait until morning." The two men disappeared behind the heavy oak door, closing it with a soft thud that echoed through the house. Left alone, I sank into a chair, my hands trembling slightly. The ticking of the grandfather clock sounded louder than ever, marking off seconds that stretched into an endless suspense. What could this news be? What shadows were lurking in the past that would darken our present? I folded and unfolded my hands, tracing the edge of a letter resting on the table. A letter I had received that very morning, but had not dared to open. Minutes passed like hours, and finally the door opened. My husband stepped out, his face drawn and pale, but his eyes held a resolute fire I had not seen in days. "We must leave at dawn," he said simply. "For how long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "To resolve these matters as swiftly as possible," he replied. There is no choice. The weight of those words settled over me like a thick fog. Fear gnawed at the edges of my heart, but beneath it stirred a strange flutter of hope. Whatever awaited us, we would face it together. That night, sleep remained elusive. I returned to my window seat, the lantern's light flickering softly beside me. I finally gathered the courage to open the letter I had kept folded and untouched since morning. The handwriting was unmistakably his, delicate, careful, filled with the intimacy of a secret confession. "My dearest, if you are reading this, then fate has taken me from your side, and I am unable to whisper these words in person. Know that my heart belongs to you, even as shadows fall between us. I love you more deeply than words can capture, and I vow to return to you, no matter the trials. Hold this letter close as a token of my unwavering devotion. Yours eternally, E." I pressed the fragile paper to my lips, feeling warmth spread through me despite the chill in the air. His words were a balm, soothing the anxious knots tightening inside my chest. When dawn finally broke, we prepared to depart. The carriage awaited, its wheels gleaming in the soft morning light, as the sun cast hopeful rays through the mist that clung to the streets. As we journeyed away from the only home I had ever known, a strange certainty grew within me. This unexpected journey, with its unknown dangers and mysteries, might just be the crucible that forges something new, something stronger, between us. For the first time since our marriage began, I allowed myself to believe in us. Not the fairy tale romance I once imagined, but the quiet, enduring partnership that might withstand even the darkest storms. The road stretched long before us, winding through misty fields and sleepy villages. The carriage rocked gently as I watched his face in the flickering lantern light, softening whenever he thought I wasn't looking. He reached for my hand, fingers entwining with mine. I squeezed back, feeling an unspoken promise in that simple touch. As the miles passed beneath the wheels, I realized love was not just fireworks or grand declarations. It was found in moments like this, in silent support, in shared uncertainty, in the courage to face whatever tomorrow might bring together. By nightfall, we reached a small coaching inn, its windows glowing warmly against the darkening sky. The innkeeper greeted us with a knowing smile, no doubt accustomed to travellers bearing heavy news and heavier hearts. We retired early, exhaustion weighing on us both, but as I lay beside him in the unfamiliar bed, I felt closer to him than ever. The letters he had written, the promises made, and the trials ahead were threads weaving us tighter together. That night, as the rain pattered softly against the window panes, I whispered into the darkness, "I love you," and hoped the words would reach him, wherever he was in his thoughts. He reached out, his hand finding mine in the dark, a lifeline across the quiet spaces. And in that moment, we began something new. A chapter not written in certainty, but in hope. The pale light of dawn filtered softly through the thick curtains of the coaching inn, spilling cold beams across the modest room where we had spent the night. Outside, a thick fog clung to the streets of the sleepy village, swallowing the faint sounds of carriage wheels and distant footsteps, muting the world into a hushed whisper. It felt as if the earth itself held its breath, waiting for the next act in a play neither of us could predict or control. I woke first, the weight of the past days heavy on my chest, a restless ache that would not release me. He lay beside me, pale and fragile, breathing slow and uneven. The sight stirred something fierce inside me, a resolve as sharp and bright as a blade's edge. This man, once so strong and invincible in my eyes, was now vulnerable in ways I hadn't expected, ways that terrified and bound me all at once. I reached out with a gentle touch, brushing a stray curl away from his forehead. His skin was cool, too cool, a reminder of the fragile line between life and death he'd walked. Memories of our early days together flooded my mind. The first time he smiled at me, the light in his eyes when he laughed, the promise of forever whispered beneath starlit skies. How had we come to this crossroads where love was tested by secrets, debt, and shadows that stretched longer than the days? The room was still but for the quiet ticking of the old clock on the mantelpiece and the soft rustle of curtains. Outside, a pale bird sang hesitantly, a fragile note in the stillness. I wanted to believe that song was for us, a promise that after the darkest nights, dawn would surely come. Breakfast was a muted affair in the inn's small dining room, with its chipped wooden tables scarred by countless meals and whispered conversations from generations past. The faint aroma of baking bread mingled with the sharp tang of wood smoke, but my appetite was gone, swallowed by the storm inside me. Across from me, he ate slowly, methodically, each bite deliberate as though savouring not just food, but time. The silence between us was thick but not heavy. It was a shared space laden with unspoken fears and hopes. I reached out and laid my hand on his, fingers curling gently around his. His eyes met mine. And in that quiet exchange we formed a pact, to face whatever lay ahead, no matter how dark. Our fragile peace was soon interrupted by the arrival of Thomas Graves, the man who had come unexpectedly, the night before with urgent news. He entered with the quiet confidence of one accustomed to bearing heavy tidings, his face etched with concern and years of hard experience. His eyes flicked briefly toward my husband, and I felt the weight of what was to come deepen. "Monsieur Everly," Thomas began, his voice low but firm, "I have come to deliver news of grave importance concerning your family estate, matters that cannot wait any longer." My husband's jaw clenched visibly. The tension in his shoulders tightened as if bracing for a storm. "Speak plainly, Thomas. There is no time for delay." Thomas nodded and produced a bundle of worn documents tied with a faded ribbon. He spread them across the table and began to explain the tangled web of financial ruin and political entanglements threatening to engulf the Everley legacy. The estate, once a bastion of wealth and stability, had slowly but surely slipped into decline. Years of mounting debts, poor investments, and shifting alliances had eroded its foundations. Creditors were circling like vultures, and old friends had become wary or hostile. The family's name, once spoken with reverence, now hung precariously on the edge of ruin. As Thomas laid out the details, I watched my husband's face closely. The exhaustion and illness were not the whole story. Beneath the pale skin and tired eyes was a man carrying a burden so heavy it seemed to press on his very soul. His gaze, normally guarded and distant, flickered with pain and a hint of desperation. The weight of responsibility that had rested silently on his shoulders now lay exposed, raw and unyielding. It explained the long days of silent worry, the guarded phone calls, the furtive meetings behind closed doors, pieces of a puzzle I had only now begun to understand. When Thomas finished, the room seemed to grow colder. The crackling fire in the hearth no longer offered warmth, and I felt a chill settle deep into my bones. It was as though the house itself mourned the unravelling of its legacy. I reached for my husband's hand again, offering what little comfort I could. He looked at me with wary gratitude, a silent thank you passing between us. "We must act swiftly," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. "There is no room for hesitation or error." I nodded firmly. "Whatever it takes, we will face it. Together?" His eyes softened for the briefest moment, and then he stood, pacing the narrow room. His fingers pressed tightly to his temple, as though to quell the storm inside his mind. "I never wanted you to bear this burden," he confessed quietly. "I thought I could protect you from it all, but now I see the truth, that we cannot hide from our past." I rose and came to his side, placing my hand on his chest where I could feel the steady beat of his heart. "You are not alone." Outside, the fog began to lift as the morning sun pierced the grey veil. Though the path ahead promised hardship, I felt a fragile hope blooming within me. This ordeal, as harrowing as it was, might be the crucible that forges us into something stronger. For the first time since our marriage began, I allowed myself to believe. Not in the fairy tales I had once dreamed of, but in the quiet strength of partnership, the courage found in shared trials. We would face the storm side by side. We would rebuild, brick by brick, the life and love we both desperately wanted. The road ahead was uncertain, shadowed with danger and despair, but it was ours to walk together, and that, above all, was enough. The carriage wheels ground slowly over the uneven cobblestones, each turn seeming to echo the heaviness settling in my chest. The journey back to the Everley estate was slow, too slow for the weight that sat on my husband's shoulders, and too slow for my restless thoughts. Outside the window, the mist curled over the fields, swallowing the landscape in a grey haze that blurred the edges of reality, as if the world itself was uncertain whether to reveal or conceal what lay ahead. My husband sat beside me, his posture rigid but his eyes clouded with fatigue. The fever had passed, but the exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. I caught the slight tremor in his hand as he reached out to grasp mine, and I squeezed gently, anchoring him and myself against the storm we were returning to. This quiet touch was a lifeline, a reminder that though the road was dark, we would walk it together. When the carriage finally rumbled to a halt, the silhouette of the manor loomed before us, a once grand structure now heavy with the weight of years and neglect. Its windows, like watchful eyes, glinted faintly in the dull light, seemingly observing us as we passed beneath the iron gates. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood, mingling with the faint trace of smoke from distant chimneys. Jenkins, the ever-loyal butler, greeted us with a solemn nod, his lined face etched with a mixture of relief and apprehension. His years of service had weathered countless storms, but even he seemed burdened by the tension that clung to the manor like a shroud. He wordlessly led us inside, the heavy oak doors closing behind us with a resonant thud that echoed through the vast, hollow halls. The grandeur of the estate had faded beneath layers of dust and silence. Portraits of grim, faced ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to judge the present state of affairs with quiet reproach. The air smelled faintly of polish and disuse, a testament to how long the house had been waiting for its true heart to return. That evening, We convened in the drawing room, a space once filled with laughter and lively conversation, but now weighed down by unspoken fears. Thomas Graves remained with us, his presence a constant reminder of the battles yet to be fought. The glow from the fireplace flickered against the high ceilings, casting long shadows that danced like restless memories along the walls. My husband spread maps, ledgers, and letters across the polished table, tracing lines that marked boundaries, debts, and potential allies. His voice was low but carried the unmistakable edge of determination. "We are at a crossroads," he said. "Some sacrifices will be necessary, decisions that will shape not just our future, but the legacy of every Everly before us." I listened closely, the gravity of each word sinking into my bones. This was no longer simply about money or land. It was about survival, preserving a name, a home, and the fragile hope for something better. Later that night, as the manor settled into a heavy silence, I found him in the library. The room smelled of old leather and faded ink, the shelves heavy with dusty tomes and forgotten letters. He sat alone by a dim candle, the flickering light casting soft shadows across his weary face. I approached quietly, slipping my hand into his. His eyes met mine, a faint smile touching his lips despite the weariness that lined them. "Do you remember when we first met?" I asked softly. He nodded. "You were reading a book I'd never heard of. You looked completely lost in the words. And you asked me what it was about?" I said. "And then you listened, really listened. I think that's when I first knew." His eyes softened. "And I was foolish to think I could protect you from everything." "You don't have to protect me," I said firmly. "We face it together." He squeezed my hand gently. Together, days stretched into weeks in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and endless negotiations. The estate staff, who had once kept their distance, began to rally behind my husband's quiet resolve. Slowly, a sense of hope began to creep into the corners of despair. But the shadows remained. At night, the manor whispered secrets. I heard footsteps echoing through empty corridors, murmurs carried on drafts, and caught fleeting glances among the servants that spoke of old grudges and hidden fears. Trust had become a fragile thread, easily broken and difficult to mend. One evening, as we sat by the fire, a letter arrived, its seal broken, the handwriting unfamiliar and jagged. The contents were a stark warning. Eyes watched us closely, enemies lurked in the shadows, and betrayal might come from where least expected. Fear gripped my heart, but it was tempered by the strength I found in him. We would not be undone by threats or silence. In the quiet moments between turmoil, I sought refuge in small gestures. His hand in mine, a shared glance that spoke volumes, the steady rhythm of breath beside me in the dark. Love, I realized, was not the grand declarations of youth or the sweeping passions of novels. It was these silent promises, the courage to endure hardship, and the determination to hold fast when hope seemed all but lost. As the months passed, we began to reclaim the estate piece by piece. Land was sold to settle pressing debts, old alliances were cautiously reforged, plans were laid to rebuild not just buildings, but lives. Through it all, we clung to each other, two souls bound not by fortune or status, but by choice and unyielding loyalty. In a house that held both shadows and light, we found a new beginning. It was quiet and imperfect, but it was ours. The manor stirred slowly, like a giant waking from a long, troubled sleep. The once grand home, which had seen generations of Everleys pass through its halls, still bore the weight of years. Dust settled thick in corners, faded tapestries hung heavy on the walls, and the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories lingered in the air. The house was a monument to the past, but it also held the present captive, binding us to shadows we could not easily escape. I moved through the dim corridors cautiously, every footfall a soft echo in the cavernous silence, each creaking floorboard and distant groan of settling. Timber seemed like whispered reminders of the estate's burden. The house, I felt, was alive with secrets, secrets too long buried, too heavy to surface without consequence. My husband spent countless hours in his study, poring over ledgers, letters, and legal documents. I watched him from the doorway on many occasions, his pale face drawn and eyes sunken, but alight with fierce determination. The weight of responsibility lay, like an invisible cloak around his shoulders, pressing down with relentless force. Yet, despite the toll it took, he never faltered. never wavered in his resolve to reclaim our family's dignity and secure our future. Those long, quiet nights were when the truth of our situation hit me the hardest. This was not merely a matter of finances or estate management. We were fighting the ghosts of generations past, echoes of mistakes, betrayals, and pride that had left their mark on every stone of this house. The Everly legacy was a tapestry woven with both triumph and tragedy, and now it was unraveling before our eyes. One rainy evening, as the wind howled through the chimneys and rain pounded the windows like frantic drumming, I found myself seeking refuge in the grand library. The shelves, towering and ancient, were lined with leather, bound volumes and brittle manuscripts, relics of knowledge and history. I ran my fingers over the spines, searching for comfort in the steady presence of these old friends. Perhaps a forgotten letter, a clue to better days, or simply an escape from the weight pressing on my heart. A gentle knock at the door broke my reverie. I turned to see Mary, the housekeeper, her face pale but eyes resolute. "Miss, there's a visitor asking for you," she said softly. Curiosity stirred within me as I followed her to the parlour. There stood a young woman, her clothes simple but neat, her eyes wide with cautious hope. "My name is Eleanor," she introduced herself quietly. "I believe I have information that could help your husband." In a house where trust was as scarce as sunlight on a winter's day, the arrival of a stranger was both a risk and a relief. I gestured for her to sit, my heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and desperate hope. Eleanor's story unfolded carefully. She had once worked for a creditor connected to the Everly estate and had witnessed dealings that threatened to strip the family of its remaining lands. She spoke of hidden ledgers, secret agreements, and the true nature of some so-called allies. More importantly, she knew of influential figures who might be persuaded to intervene on our behalf if approached with care and conviction. Her words were a spark in the gloom. For the first time in many weeks, I saw a flicker of light in my husband's eyes when I relayed Eleanor's message. It was hope, fragile, yes, but undeniable. Together, we began weaving a cautious plan. Each step forward was measured, each alliance sought with wary precision. The stakes were immense. A single misstep could shatter what little we had left. But the alternative, surrender, was unthinkable. Amid the swirl of negotiations and strategizing, moments of tenderness emerged like rare flowers pushing through cracked stone. I treasured the small comforts his hand finding mine across a cluttered desk. A brief smile shared in the candlelight, the quiet strength of presence when words failed. One night, as the storm raged outside and the house groaned beneath the wind's fury, we stood together by the hearth. The fire's flickering light cast dancing shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to mimic the flicker of hope growing between us. He took my hands in his grip firm yet gentle. "I am sorry for the nights I have seemed distant," he said, his voice low and full of regret. "For the burdens I kept from you." I shook my head. "We carry these burdens together. There is no need for apologies." His gaze held mine, a mixture of sorrow and hope. "I want us to build something real, beyond debts, beyond past mistakes. Something that lasts." "I want that too," I whispered. The days turned to weeks. The estate slowly began to awaken from its slumber. The staff, once wary and resigned, rallied behind my husband's determination. The gardens, neglected and wild, showed the first signs of care. The house, filled once more with voices and footsteps, began to breathe. Yet, the shadows remained. Whispers drifted in the halls, old wounds and grudges lay just beneath the surface. Trust was fragile and precious, a thing easily shattered by suspicion. One afternoon, a letter arrived with no return address. Its seal was broken, the handwriting jagged and hurried. Inside was a stark warning enemies watched closely, and betrayal could come from those closest to us. Fear tightened its grip, but so did resolve. We would not be undone. Together, we faced each threat, the whispered rumors, the quiet sabotage, the heavy silences. In those moments, I understood that love was not the grand gestures or fiery declarations found in novels. It was quiet endurance, the strength to keep going when hope was thin, the courage to stand side by side despite the storm. Together, we would rebuild, brick by brick, moment by moment. In this ancient house, tangled with shadows and memories, we carved out a new story, one of resilience, quiet love, and the unwavering hope of a tomorrow that was ours to shape. The days lengthened, but the weight on my shoulders did not lighten. The Everley estate, with its faded grandeur and stubborn ghosts, had become a battleground, a place where whispers carried more power than swords, and where every smile masked an uncertain allegiance. Our fragile progress was a flickering candle struggling against an encroaching wind, threatening to be snuffed out by betrayal and misfortune. My husband, ever the stoic pillar, bore the crushing burden with grim determination. His days were filled with meetings and correspondences, navigating the treacherous waters of debt and diplomacy. At night, he returned home wary but resolute, the fire in his eyes dimmed but not extinguished. I watched him, admiring his strength, but fearing the toll it took. The illness that had plagued him before lingered like a shadow, and I knew that this fight was as much against time and health as it was against enemies visible and unseen. It was during one such evening, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rumbled distantly, that Thomas Graves returned with news. News that brought both hope and dread. An invitation had arrived, an opportunity to meet potential allies among the local gentry, men and women whose support could tip the scales in our favour. But it was no casual gathering. The event was a formal ball, a delicate dance of politics and power cloaked in glittering gowns and sharp wit. For us, it was a test, a chance to rebuild not just fortunes but reputations, and for me, it was a plunge into a world where every word, every glance, was loaded with meaning and consequence. The preparation was painstaking. My dress, simple yet elegant, was chosen to speak of quiet strength rather than ostentation. My husband, clad in his finest tailored coat, bore the weight of expectation with quiet dignity. As we entered the grand hall, the glittering chandeliers cast a warm glow over a sea of faces, some friendly, others wary. Conversations flowed like rivers of carefully chosen words, and I felt the prickling awareness of eyes assessing, judging. This was a game of masks and shadows, where trust was the most precious and dangerous currency. We moved among the guests, exchanging pleasantries and veiled inquiries. My husband's steady presence calmed my nerves, and together we sought openings, allies who might stand with us against the tide of creditors and rivals. It was not without risk. Whispers reached us of rivals eager to exploit any weakness, of alliances forged in secrecy that threatened to isolate us further. Yet, amid the treacheries, we found glimmers of support. A sympathetic nod here, a discreet promise there. One encounter stood out: Lord Ashcombe, a man known for his sharp mind and pragmatic approach to politics. His gaze was piercing, but beneath the veneer of calculation, I sensed a flicker of genuine interest. "You have much to rebuild, Mr. Everley," he said quietly during a rare moment when we stood apart from the crowd. "But determination is a powerful ally. Do not underestimate the strength it brings." And my husband met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "We intend to do more than survive. We will restore what was lost." Lord Ashcombe nodded slowly. "Then you have my attention." The evening stretched on, a delicate dance of words and glances, promises and precautions. As the last notes of the orchestra faded and guests began to depart, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and cautious hope. We had survived the gauntlet, for now, but the gathering storm was far from past. In the quiet aftermath, shadows deepened. Back at the manor, a letter arrived with no sender, a stark reminder that enemies lurked ever closer, watching and waiting. One night, as I lay awake beside my husband, the silence between us was thick with unspoken fears. I reached for his hand, finding the familiar warmth despite the chill that had settled in our lives. "We will face whatever comes," I whispered. He squeezed my hand, voice low but resolute. Together, in the days that followed, we fortified our defences, both in the estate and in our hearts. Every alley was valued, every shadow scrutinised. The battle for the Everley legacy was no longer just about land or money. It was about survival, trust, and the fragile threads that held us together. And through it all, the bond between us grew stronger, tempered in fire, tested by betrayal, and unbroken by despair. In this house of whispered secrets and hidden dangers, we found our own truth, that love was not the absence of hardship, but the courage to stand together in the face of it. The night before our fate was to be decided, the manor lay cloaked in silence, its stone walls heavy with anticipation. Outside, the stars flickered weakly behind a veil of clouds, as if even the heavens held their breath. Inside, I wandered through the familiar halls, rooms steeped in memory, some of joy, others shadowed by the struggles we'd endured. It felt as though the house itself waited alongside us, a silent participant in our final trial. My husband sat by the fire in the drawing room, a letter clutched tightly in his hand. His usual calm was fractured by a tension I had not seen before, the weight of responsibility pressing down with renewed force. I approached quietly and took my place beside him, letting my presence be a balm against the uncertainty. "We've come far," I said softly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it as one." He looked up, the faintest of smiles touching his lips. "Together?" he echoed. The following day dawned cold and grey, the mist hanging low over the grounds like a shroud. We travelled to the town hall, where the final negotiations would be held. The corridors were lined with faces, some familiar, others stern and unreadable. The air was thick with tension, every whispered word carrying weight. The room where the meeting took place was austere, dominated by a long oak table scarred by decades of decisions. At its head sat the council, their expressions guarded, their eyes sharp as they assessed our case. We presented our plan, a careful balance of repayment and restructuring, bolstered by the alliances we had painstakingly forged. For hours, voices rose and fell, arguments made and countered. At times, I caught the flicker of doubt in my husband's eyes, the ghost of exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. But he held firm, his words measured and resolute. When the council finally retired to deliberate, the silence was suffocating. Minutes stretched like hours as we waited, the future suspended on a knife's edge. Then, the doors opened. The lead councilman stepped forward, his face unreadable. "After careful consideration, we find your proposal acceptable," he declared. "The terms are strict, but fair. The Everley estate shall be granted the opportunity to rebuild under these conditions." A relief flooded through me like sunlight breaking a stormy sky. My husband exhaled deeply, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in months. We returned to the manor, the weight of uncertainty lifted, replaced by cautious hope. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. That evening, as the firelight flickered warmly against the walls, my husband and I stood together on the veranda, the cool night air brushing against our faces. The stars above, once hidden, now shone brightly, a quiet promise of renewal. He took my hand, his grip steady and sure. "We have endured much," he said, voice low. "But this is just the beginning. There is a future for us, one built not on the shadows of the past, but on the strength we've found together." I nodded, feeling a profound peace settle within me. A future of our making. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of rebuilding, not just the estate, but ourselves. The gardens were tended with care, the halls filled once again with the sounds of life. Trust was slowly restored among the staff, and new alliances blossomed. But more than bricks and mortar, it was the rekindling of our relationship that marked the true turning point. We found joy in small moments, shared laughter over evening tea, quiet conversations beneath the stars, the simple comfort of a hand held in the dark. Our love, tested by hardship and shadowed by doubt, emerged stronger and more resilient. We had faced the storm together and found shelter in each other. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the library, he surprised me with a gift, a locket, delicate and ornate, inside which rested a tiny portrait of us. "To remind us," he said, "of what we've overcome and what lies ahead." I smiled through tears, the weight of the journey lifting as hope blossomed anew. The Everley estate was no longer a prison of past mistakes, but a canvas for our future. And in the quiet strength of our bond, I found a certainty that transcended fear and doubt. We were no longer two souls adrift in a sea of shadows. We were partners, allies, and above all, a family bound not by name or fortune, but by love and choice. As I stood beside him on the veranda, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew this was the dawn of us, a beginning forged in fire and tempered by grace. No matter what storms may come, we would face them together, hand in hand, heart to heart, and that was enough.